So this is actually a pretty good question, okay? Let's say, for example, you just decided to go ahead and buy some stock in Apple. You want to be a buyer of Apple. Finally, you decided, I'm not going to buy an iPhone. I'm going to spend some money on some Apple stock. So all of a sudden, you go ahead, you buy some stock in Apple. Now, the next thing, you hear an announcement. All of a sudden, Warren Buffett has said, I want to buy the entire company of Apple. Now you're probably wondering, well, is this legal for him to do? Can he actually do it? And how does this whole thing work? Because if he buys out Apple, what exactly happens to my stock, to my shares? Like I finally go ahead, invest some money into Apple, and all of a sudden the company is getting bought out. What the heck, okay? In this video, we're going to break everything down. What happens when the company you own shares in basically gets bought out, is gonna be merged into another company, or something crazy is happening, okay? Now, as always, guys, like this video, and top out also subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified. I actually like this topic a lot because it's never happened to me, but it's always been super interesting. And I'm pretty sure at some point it's gonna happen to me where a company that I own is potentially gonna be bought out by somebody else, which is basically a good sign that you're investing into the right things, potentially. Unless the person buying it is also a dummy. Now, the first thing is this, guys. As far as, for example, a controlling interest in a company, who actually runs the entire company is the person that basically owns more than half of all of the outstanding shares out there. So, for example, if you actually want to have control of a company and you own, for example, 50% plus one, you basically own the company. You're the owner. You can kind of do whatever you want. But until somebody else actually has a position, you have, for example, the board of directors that kind of helps and assists as being, for example, advisors in a sense to make sure hostile takeovers don't really happen or so on. More on that later in the video. But that's the idea. In order for another company to come in and to own the whole thing, to make the deal happen, they got to own more than half. Sometimes this is a very normal procedure, but sometimes it can be very hostile. And people can basically do, for example, leverage buyouts and so on, but that's another video for another day. That's the first thing. The second thing is, guys, okay, whenever the board is for the merger, they call it a buyout. They call it a merger. They call it a business deal. They call it an acquisition. Whenever the board is against the buyout, they call it, for example, a hostile takeover. It's whenever a company tries to slowly but surely take control of the company by buying out as many shares as possible. I remember, for example, when the Wall Street, what was it called, the Washington Post, it lost a bunch of market value, and Warren Buffett was basically swallowing up all the outstanding shares, and they got scared because they thought, wow, Warren Buffett is potentially going to try to take out, take over the whole company, and we're going to be in trouble. But he says, hey, I'm just doing this for business purposes. I'm not doing this because they basically want to own the company whatsoever, so you have nothing to worry about. But sometimes you have, for example, companies that say, hey, I want to own this thing. And if they want to do it, for example, in a very good way, they talk to the board of directors, they try to structure a deal, to structure an offering, and to make the whole thing smoothly. If that doesn't go well and they still want to do it, they go ahead and basically try to buy out as many shares as possible to basically own and seize control of the entire company. However, there are certain things that basically the board does to avoid these things. For example, they try to dilute the shares so your ownership basically goes down. They try to do a few things here and there to make sure that a hostile takeover doesn't happen. And obviously, it can be very, very expensive. Now, the third thing is, guys, okay, the party trying to buy the company usually has to incentivize shareholders like me and you to sell our shares to them. So they do what they call is a tender offer. A tender offer is whenever, for example, is usually going to be above the current market price. Now, I've seen situations where basically Buffett has bought companies way above what the market price is basically at because he saw value in those companies. I think one of those companies was a paint company. Another one was a mobile home company. And I forgot what the third one was potentially, okay? But the idea is a company could be selling for $12 a share. Now, if this person is trying to buy or company or whatever sees extra value in it, they might say, hey, I'm willing to pay $15 or $20, okay? And whenever that happens, usually the price shoots up to try to match that because they're trying to take advantage of it. Because if the price is $12 and I know it's going to basically get bought out at $15, $20, why wouldn't I basically want to buy into the company to basically get sold out at that price and basically make a good profit, quick profit, okay? Overall, that's what happens. Now, this basically means that if I own shares, well, how would I basically get paid? Number 4 is here. Well, if the tender offer is above the price I actually paid for it, I can get paid, for example, in cash. So if I own a share of Apple and they're offering, for example, $15 a share, which is unrealistic, it's a lot more obviously, well, I'll get $15 in cash, the equivalent, even if I pay $10 or $1 for it, because that's the offer they're offering. But sometimes mergers and acquisitions, what they basically do is say, hey, we're going to give you some cash, and we're also going to give you, for example, some of our stock in this company. So, for example, okay, Warren Buffett says, hey, I'm going to buy Apple. I'm going to give you $50 in cash, and then I'm going to give you, for example, a B share or a half a share in Berkshire Hathaway B shares or whatever, okay? That way you're actually a part owner with us. You also have cash. If you want to sell our shares, go ahead and sell it and make double the cash. Boom, you're good to go. But that's the overall idea. Usually, we don't have enough power to stop this unless we kind of take it to court and so on. And I'm going to give you an example in a second here. But the fifth thing is, guys, okay, what happens is if the person that actually buys a share says, hey, I want to take this company private, the shares basically disappear. You get your cash or other shares in other companies, and then boom, that's basically it. The company is basically in somebody else's hand. Now the company is private. Or they might choose to keep it public, but now they have the controlling interest and they have power to do whatever they want to do. And you have to think about this very carefully, because if you invest into a company because you like the management, you like how the company is ran, somebody else takes over the company, they might try to over leverage the company, borrow a bunch of money on debt and all this stuff to try to maximize or whatever, and you might end up with a completely different company. Now, here's an example of this, okay? For example, there was a time when Dell, the laptop company, yeah, they were having a very hard time, and the owner of Dell was considering taking the company private, and he made an offer. I think it was like around 12 something dollars or something like that. And people thought that, hey, this is not fair, because the person that's trying to buy the company is the CEO of the company. He knows a lot more than we do, and it's not a fair deal because he's probably going to get a good deal for himself, because that's not really how it's supposed to be ran. While the CEO, or for example, is supposed to be helping our shareholders, but he's enticed to help himself. It was a conflict of interest by far. But the idea was the shareholders actually managed to take him to court. And when they took him to court, they said, hey, the true value of Dell shares is more like around 15, I think it was, or like $17 per share, which is actually above what he said it was. But he wasn't really doing it to be misconstrued or, for example, like nasty, although that's what it kind of says. I'm not really sure what the guy was thinking. But the idea is you could have situations where shareholders kind of come together and try to take this whole thing to court, legislation, to make, for example, the offer either better or to stop the whole thing from actually happening, potentially. But in capitalism, it's very tricky, because if I have a lot of money, the shares are outstanding, I offer you a better deal than you have, you're willing to sell, then I have controlling interest, I have controlling interest, I own the company. It's that simple. But sometimes you might have, for example, a hostile takeover. That's also a thing. And that can be very tricky, because a company can take control of a company, but the company doesn't want them to take control of them, and they might become very stubborn, and it might be like a whole different issue. I think that's why Warren Buffett always says, like, he wants to be in business with people that want to be in business with him. He's not interested in doing hostile takeovers whatsoever. It is not actually worth it overall. But that is it, guys. Overall, whenever you think about, well, if I own shares in this company and it's get bought out, you'll probably get, for example, the tender offer. You might get it in cash, you might get it in stock, or you might just get a combination of both. But don't think, for example, wow, they bought out my shares, now I don't have anything. No, it doesn't work like that, okay? You're still good to go. It's still safe. Don't worry. By the way, if you're wondering why would a company want to buy another company, it's because sometimes the operations at a company becomes very slow, and they're more interested in buying the growth of another company. That's why you have, for example, Facebook buying Instagram, buying WhatsApp, buying these other growing companies that are basically coming up, Oculus and so on, because it just makes a lot more sense. And if you want to know if a company is buying other companies, look into their financial statements, for example, the 10Q, and it tells you exactly, hey, this company is buying this company and that company. And it's not to say that every single company they buy is actually a good thing, because sometimes they overpay. And that's not a good thing, because if you're overpaying for something's worth, then that's not good. And if you actually go to the balance sheet and you see like a goodwill statement on the asset side of the whole column, that shows you how much over the book value they actually paid for a company. But again, that's another video for another day. Just more info to give you. Now, Thanks for watching, guys. As always, like, subscribe, hit the bell so you're notified. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, comment down below stock so I know you made it all the way to the end. Also, comment down below exactly what is your favorite company out there. It's interesting, because as I do more stock research and look up more companies, a lot of companies right now, they're selling for less than they're worth. So it's always interesting to find out, what do you like, so I can look into it, make a video on it, and potentially make some money on it, okay? Thanks for watching. As always, like, subscribe, hit the bell so you're notified, comment down below any questions. DM me on Instagram, TommyBryson. Up here is another video. Over here is my face. Click on subscribe. And as always, long-term team officially out.